How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to 2A News Now. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Troy. And here at 2A News Now, you get your Second Amendment news straightforward and to the point with no BS added in. Here's your liberal logic for today. More gun control is needed to prevent a second civil war. A recent report by the Center of Gun Violence Solutions, which is part of Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, funded by Michael Bloomberg, conflates private gun ownership with armed insurrection in order to advocate for expanded gun control. The 32-page study, which is titled Defending Democracy, Addressing the Danger of Armed Insurrection, not only revisits and revises the January you-know-what protest, even though no protesters were armed, and the only casualty was 35-year-old Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt, who was shot and killed by a Capitol Police officer, and resurrects actual armed insurrections from American history, such as Shays' Rebellion in 1786, the Whiskey Rebellion of 1791, and the American Civil War. The three authors, who are all attorneys with a history of paid anti-gun activism, clumsily raised the insurrection boogeyman to push additional regulations for carrying firearms, tactical training prohibitions, additional gun-free zones, expanded red flag laws, and the repeal of state preemption statutes, which has long been the major goal of the gun ban industry. Preemption laws prevent local jurisdictions from enacting their own gun control regulations, which would result in patchwork gun-free zones. The author's warped message is to be expected, especially when you consider the biased nature of their backgrounds, their sponsors, their sources, and Michael Bloomberg's school itself. The Center for Gun Violence Solution admits it uses a public health approach to identify gun control solutions, even though a gun is an inanimate object, not a disease, ailment, or disorder. The school further claims it uses rigorous scientific research to identify a range of innovative solutions to gun violence. However, the author's rigorous scientific research turned out to be nothing more than false claims, gleaned from biased stories from the legacy media and other anti-gun organizations that masquerade as actual news websites. Here's a list the authors use stories from, and as you'll see from the list, you can see why they're biased. CNN, ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, PBS, NPR Vox, The Los Angeles Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, The Washington Post, USA Today, The Associated Press, Bloomberg Effect, Politico, Slate, and of course the Southern Poverty Law Center. They even use stories from two dedicated anti-gun groups, Giffords and the Trace, the propaganda arm of former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, Gun Control Empire. Let's talk about how biased the authors are. The report was written by Tim Carey, Kelly Roscom, and Joshua Horowitz. Kelly is a law and policy advisor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. According to his bio, he's responsible for drafting legislation, regulations, legal reports, legislative testimony, fact sheets, and other advocacy materials. Carey was the law and policy staff attorney for the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence and the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Roscom is the director of law and policy at Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions. Prior to joining Johns Hopkins, she was the general counsel and legal director for the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence and the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Roscom's bio also states she interned at the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Horowitz is the co-director for the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions before joining Johns Hopkins. He too worked at the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence and the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, serving as executive director. Now let's see how biased these reports are. The authors claim their report is both an examination and warning about the threat that armed insurrectionism poses to democracy in the United States, the growing presence of firearms in political spaces in the United States dangers public health, safety, and the functioning of democracy. Far from being an outlier, the January 6th you-know-what at the United States Capitol was part of a long line of events in which individuals have sought to use political losses to justify violence or threats of violence, to disrupt our government and limit civic engagement. As stated, the policy recommendations presented by the authors are merely long-standing goals of the gun ban industry, which would help to propel them toward their ultimate goal of total civilian disarmament. The only difference is that now their policy recommendations are presented as necessary to address the dangers of armed insurrectionism. Let's take a look at the biased sponsors. The authors wrote, "We would like to thank the Joyce Foundation and the Morningstar Foundation for supplying core support for this report. The Joyce Foundation is firmly committed to gun control. According to their website, the Joyce Foundation seeks to advance and implement federal, state, and local policies and practices to reduce easy accessibility of guns to those at risk of violence. Support policies to reduce easy accessibility of guns to those at risk of violence. Reduce the next generation's exposure to gun violence through education on the risk of gun ownership. Litigate to defend evidence-based gun policies and challenge extreme gun rights policies and practices." The Morningstar Foundation is a 401c3 nonprofit founded in 1982. In fiscal year 2017, the Morningstar Foundation reported $16,533,591 in revenue and $14,476,618 in expenditures, which including grants to many left-center organizations. Some of the recipients include, of course, the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, and of course the Southern Poverty Law Center, States United to Prevent Gun Violence, and the Violence Policy Center. Lastly, let's take a look at the Bloomberg Effect. In 2001, Johns Hopkins University renamed its School of Hygiene and Public Health to the Bloomberg School of Public Health. The change came after Michael Bloomberg donated over $100 million to the university, the largest cash gift in the school's 125-year history. In 2001, Bloomberg said he's grateful and proud to have his name linked with the world's greatest public health school. He said he's always supported Johns Hopkins just because it gives him great personal pleasure to be associated with faculty, researchers, and students that do such tremendous work on issues that really matter. He said the honor is really icing on the cake for him. Now that you have all the information that I gave you, let me know in the comments how biased you think this is. And is gun control really needed to prevent a second civil war? My opinion is these people have lost their absolute freaking minds. They're obsessed and they're infected with liberal logic, which there is only one known cure for. As always, I would really like to hear thoughts on today's story in the comment section down below. And if you guys would continue to do what you always do on each video, and that's to like, share, and subscribe and hit those post notifications, I really would appreciate it. And I invite everybody back to watch my next video.